City of Wildwood Council Planning and Parks Committee meeting for Tuesday, September 19th, 2023. Thank you all for joining, and we do a roll call, please.
Absolutely. Councilmember Clark? I am absolutely excited to be here. Councilmember Ottenberg?
Here.
Councilmember Marshall?
Present.
Councilmember Galani?
Here.
Councilmember Rambo?
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell?
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni?
Here.
Councilmember Flasher? And we have a quorum.
All right, well, we'll move right on into the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from the committee's meeting on Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. Does someone like to make a motion? Councilmember Marshall, seconded by anybody? Councilmember Dodwell, all in favor of the motion, or any discussion on the motion first? All right, okay, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
She had a question.
Oh, sorry.
On the discussion on the sound mitigation, we also made a point that it should be noise mitigation and not sound mitigation. And then there was a miscellaneous that was not added on there that I think it was Dr. Rambo made the comments about pertinent part, and got updates from Mr. Bunich.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if the make and second of the motion would be agreeable, we'll make those minor changes to the minutes, but still request that they be adopted tonight.
I would.
I'll agree.
You guys both good?
Yeah,
All right,
Yep.
so
both good.
both the maker and the second of the motion have agreed to that, so everybody else is good with that we can move along. And any other discussion or items to bring up regarding the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any object? Any abstentions? All right,
Thank you.
minutes are approved. Ms. Ribito, do we have any public, is anybody waiting that would like to speak in public participation?
If anyone in attending via Zoom would like to speak at this time, please raise your hand and we will promote you to speak as a public participant. Does not look like it. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for those that are joining. And that takes us right into our next item on the agenda, which is under action items. And we'll start with planning matters. And Mr. Bunich, you'll enlighten us on the selection of the consultant team along with the subcommittee members of City Council for the landscape manual review components.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you'll recall from our August meeting, the department prepared a memorandum that requested the endorsement of the committee members in terms of how we would proceed with, for the most part, combining the landscape manual and our sustainable planning's guide into a single document that, for the most part, as described, would be less text, more images, and ultimately be done hopefully by the first quarter of the next year, 2024. It was a good discussion that followed that particular presentation, and ultimately the committee did endorse it. The committee, however, added one item which the department certainly thought was an excellent suggestion, and that was creating a small subcommittee of city council members to assist the consultant team and the Department of Public Works and Planning as we develop this single new guide. At that time, from my memory, Dr. Rambo and Ms. Dodwell both volunteered. And certainly we could have a third member if there was interest. And so tonight we were presenting that as the first action item. Is there anyone else on the committee or outside the committee on the remainder of the city council that would be interested? And then secondly, the department would like to offer tonight the selection of a group to assist that subcommittee, Public Works and Planning, in this development. And as part of that, the primary consultant would be a company called DG2. It's owned by a lady named Christy DeGuire. They do a lot of work with Great Rivers Greenway. And most recently are helping them update all of their signage along each of their trail corridors. And they actually did a very nice kind of schematic plan, master plan for Bluffview Park a number of years ago. Secondly, we'd like to engage Stacy Minkoff, who just finished our history book. And if you get a chance to see that either before Saturday or Saturday, I think you'll be very impressed with the quality of her work, her eye, so to speak, in terms of just getting things to fit on a page and look right in color selections. And then finally, as an arborist, I think we've had great success with Andy Berg. He used to be with Davy Resource Group. Now he's with Hanson's Tree Service, but he still does consulting, and I'd like to start with him. Mr. Berg did a lot of things for us relative to the reserve site and ultimately helped us a great deal when we started the update of our tree preservation and restoration code. And so I think he'd be a real good person to bring on board. So what the department is respectfully requesting tonight in summary is the endorsement of the 2 members that have volunteered, and if there's a third, that addition. And then secondly, to be authorized to contact these 3 consultants, receive proposals for their services, and then bring them back at the October meeting with the budget. Is there any
Okay.
questions?
Councilmember Dodwell?
I just have a question. What do we have budgeted for the project since we're going to be bringing in folks that will have to pay?
Well, that's a very good question, because as we tail off into the end of 2023, a lot of our consultants' fees have been absorbed by the tree preservation and restoration code, our hardcore area. I think I have enough if we do something in October, so their proposals and have it at city council in November. I think I have enough to get them started, meaning several $1,000s. Because I won't bring them all on board right away. I think the best approach is probably to start with the primary, and that would be DG2, Christy DeGuire, if she's interested. And then for the upcoming budget meeting in October, I'll probably talk to you more. And that's why I'm hoping to get the proposals between now and then, so I can have solid numbers to provide to the committee.
Okay. Does anybody else have? Councilmember Clark?
I would be willing to be a part of that team if they need somebody else.
Well, and this is just my opinion. I always like it when there's an odd number. 1's not enough, but 3, if there is a debate on an issue, at least between the council members, we won't have a tie.
Sure. Would you like to be that third?
I would.
Okay. All right. Do we need a motion for that?
Yes, the motion on the item adding the subcommittee to the process, and then if it's agreeable, to at least reach out to those 3 consultants and seek proposals for services.
Okay, so let's start out. Would somebody like to make a motion first to add the committee, the subcommittee, 3 members?
I'll make that motion.
Councilmember Marshall, would somebody like to second that?
Sure.
Councilmember Rambo? Is any discussion on the motion? Being, go ahead.
I just want to restate that Andy Berg's probably the right choice for this. He's done a lot of our documentation already. He and I have spoken on the phone a couple times. I've never met the man. I'm anxious to, but he seems to have a good head on his shoulders in terms of what Wildwood needs, and connecting that to the realities of tree preservation, tree science, I guess, arboriculture. So he's a good guy.
Very good. Mr. Vunish, do we need to make 2 separate, one motion for the subcommittee and then vote on that, and then another motion to provide authorization for the? Okay, so then on this one, and then do we need to add Councilmember Clark to be the third, or just mention the 3, Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember? Okay, so in this motion that Councilmember Marshall made
Make
second,
the motion to include Councilmember Clark with the other 2 council members.
Okay.
For the
and then
committee.
Councilmember Rambo seconded that. And so any other discussion on this motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any objections? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, the 3 of you, for volunteering to participate. Look forward to seeing good stuff from there. Okay, so next up, would somebody like to make a motion to provide authorization to the department to get proposals from these three providers? Councilmember Rambo
I
makes the
will.
motion, Councilmember Dodwell, second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any objections? And any abstentions? All right, great job. That passes. So we'll look forward to seeing the proposals you said in October.
Yes.
Director Benish, okay. Very good. That brings us up to the next item on the agenda under planning matters, which is the presentation of initial capital improvements project for 2024 and the 5-year plan.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. First and foremost, I want to say I'm not trying to do an end run on our normal budget process, which, as you know, for department heads, the city administrator and the finance team began about 3 weeks ago. We've been working on our operating budgets as well as the capital improvement plan and, the 5-year plan and the program. However, oftentimes of late, you all received the budgets when a lot of decisions have been made. And in some instances, those decisions may not be consistent with the priorities in each of your wards. And this seems to be particularly true from the department's perspective relative to capital improvements. So I thought tonight, since we had an opportune time before we began all those budget meetings in October, to just kind of give you a snapshot of what we're looking at in 2024 for fiscal year projects, as well as that 5-year plan. What is not on the memorandum is kind of that linkage between the strategic plan that was developed by City Council and adopted recently. And that will follow, I promise. But for the most part, what I was trying to do here is just make sure that you understood what we were looking at, the priorities of the department relative to the upcoming series of years, and then more important, or at least equally important, is there something on here that you all have talked about in the past that Melanie and I have blanked out and needs to be added, or at least needs to be discussed before we move forward into the budget discussions in October? So for the most part, I'm going to do this as briefly as possible. As you know, after Saturday, our prime venue space for all of our concerts and major events will be under development by this time next year, if not in some regards nearing completion. And so we've always been told by City Council, both committee-wise and as the whole, that Village Green needs to be a priority. Melanie and Chris have put a very good, concise, tight grant application into this Municipal Park Grant Commission. They did a pre-review. We've got very positive responses on the pre-review. So we're pretty confident this year we're going to see about $575,000 from that grant program to offset what we now have is a cost of about $2 million. So from that perspective, we are still identifying Village Green Phase 1 as a priority, and we'll go into the details, Melanie, particularly when we get to that item on the agenda. Secondly, which is not necessarily a parks project, but it's Main Street extension. As you know, we've had a lot of discussions of late with McBride Homes about their proposal on Crestview Drive. Along with those discussions, we had another development entity bring in a proposal on the opposite side of Crestview Drive. And we're looking at different combinations and certainly how we're going to fund what is estimated to be a $4 million project. $2 million of that $4 million figure is undergrounding the utility lines. And that may be an expensive car we can't drive. And for the most part, we're looking at options of relocating them, but still aerial so that we can save funds. So the hard improvements, let's say minus the utility, is about $2 million. Dan Ron, our assistant city engineer, did a very nice job of kind of breaking that $2 million cost out based upon frontages. The McBride Homes, 7 lots, the Sansone, the 1 lot that's not part of the proposal on the north side of Crestview Drive. The 2 lots that's north latitude 38 and our 2 lots that are Village Green. And roughly speaking, it all ranges somewhere, except for Miss Sansone, between about $400,000 and $650,000 if we all shared the cost equally. And so we're working hard on that. We think the benefit is multiple fold. Obviously, it helps Village Green. Secondly, I think it'll help Town Center. And thirdly, it'll give people, I believe, that already use Crestview Drive to get to here and there and everywhere, a safe, well-lit environment for the future. The next item is our hardcourt area. As you know, we spent a great deal of 2022 and the beginning of 2023 working on a hardcourt facility for Community Park. That ultimately was changed to the development here at Taylor Road and Main Street. And I talked with the engineer today, George Stock, and they are incorporating our plans into that development proposal. And that will be part of the site development plan that's being submitted. I would note, it appears that Mr. Cohn, Mr. Greenberg, and Green Street, their multiple family developer, are carrying the cost of all that engineering for us. So a little bit of a surprise there. It's certainly a welcome addition. What the department has recommended is that what we proposed over in Community Park be brought over here. I think there was a strong consensus on the committee and city council that that forecourt design, 2 of which were exclusively to, 3 of which were exclusively to pickleball, and the 1 that was tennis court that could be converted to half-court basketball areas if we choose. And so that's underway. And then finally, as you know, we have 2 projects that have been endorsed by City Council from our Watershed Erosion Task Force. They deal with the Highlands at Wild Horse, an area where we have a newer bridge that is in transition. It's not bad, but we're seeing some signs. And we also have, again, just some issues along that stretch of creek, and then Evergreen Forest Court, where we believe we have a couple of existing residences that are being threatened. Collectively, we put it all together, and suffice to say, it's an expensive bunch of projects, but be aware, we're looking for grant funding. We'll hope to receive grant funding. We're looking at staging these, and certainly the development community will be involved in some. Other than that, the department spent a lot of time, at least for 2024, taking a hard look at what we could or could not do. And so from that perspective, I would only draw your attention to one other item, and that's the Essen Log Cabin. And from that perspective, as you know, we've been talking about the reassembly. We finally found a home for it here in Village Green, just over by the trash enclosure. It's to be relocated. But that's a project that I didn't put on the top 5 or top 4. It would be number 5 if I were doing 5. But certainly that's what we're thinking. And then from there on out, for the most part, the major commitment that the department is making is, for the most part, to Burtner Park in terms of planning, design, engineering, and construction. And as you can see, construction is at least 2 years away. And then finally, although I'll probably change these numbers based on a conversation today, Route 66 Roadside Park, 2025, some money set aside for design and engineering. And then we need to talk more, I think, a greater level of detail about what type of park facility we'll ultimately want there. So that's a real, probably not as brief a summary as I promised, but I wanted you to understand what we're thinking in terms of priorities, what we've done beyond those 4 priority projects, and then anything we missed. And those are the things you know from your constituents or being in your wards, more so than Colin and I at this time. So Melanie and I are available for any questions. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Councilmember Dottawall?
Just a couple of questions. If we just start at the top of your great list here of planned project expenditures. The first one is property acquisitions, and you've got 100,000 slated potentially for 2024. Do we have any that are out there that you're already wanting? I thought we had kind of decided we'd hold off on adding any new park land until we can get some of our current park land under control.
And you're absolutely correct. The direction to the department has been improve our existing facilities, not build new. In this particular instance, it's a property that's located on Grand Avenue in Glencoe.
Okay,
It's between Glencoe City Park and Al Foster. It's the one property we don't own.
okay, then I know what you're talking about. I would suggest that if you're presenting this to the council as a whole, you put that level of detail in there so that the question doesn't get asked again, sorry.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Councilmember Rambo?
So is that a different property from the one we kind of decided to pass on in the same area there? Yeah, okay, so it's yeah, as a general rule, we wouldn't have been able to jump on a couple of properties that we got for very attractive prices down there had the department not had the foresight to put in property acquisition. So I'm always gonna try to stand firm on that particular line item. My two questions were the old pond school repairs. Joe, we sort of approved that, I thought, the painting and so on and so forth. Is this something else in fiscal year 2025, or is it just an ongoing maintenance item? Or
In 2025, I was hoping to do some type of waterproofing downstairs, and I didn't have any bids, so the numbers, I hope, a little high. But that was the intent, to do that waterproofing there. And then thereafter, it's just kind of general maintenance.
okay, yeah, that's good enough. Don't need any more detail than that. I was just wondering if you missed putting in fiscal year 2024 painting project, or if that's going to be in the 2023 budget.
There were rescheduled 5-star painting after the council received the item under information.
So we're paying for it this year.
Yeah.
Okay, the other question is, what's going on at Bellevue Farms? That's $250,000. I mean, as you know, I support the project and so forth, but that's, you can do a lot with a $250,000.
Well, as part of our lease agreement with St. Louis County, we were to have the park open, quite frankly, a while back.
Okay.
And so we have a very modest plan that calls for us to improve the access road to a new entry area, not the existing gravel drive, and have a parking lot there. So we're doing the minimum amount of impervious surfaces, and then we'll link the parking lot to the existing gravel trail with a small trail segment. And so the idea is to basically open it to the public. And we think that amount can get us that resurfacing to the point of the parking lot and then the parking lot itself.
Well, that road that runs along the south is terrible anyway, so you don't have to do too much to improve it and make it at least to that standard. Are you talking about somewhat to the east of the existing driveway?
Exactly.
And then just put it in the meadow there where we've just planted flowers and
Actually, no, we were going to push it a little further to the west of the existing access. There's a grove of cedars.
oh, okay, yeah, take out some of those cedars, sure.
And then we'd hide the parking with the remainder of the cedars.
Awesome. Okay, all right. Yeah, so that sounds good. Are they okay with leaving those boarded up buildings there, which seem like an attractive nuisance to some extent?
Well, the more modern garage got hit by lightning and burned to the ground. I mean, it went fast, according to the fire marshal. So we have those three kind of barracksy looking buildings. The caretaker's residence, I called it the Carn Crib. I know that's not and then the barn. Obviously, the Friends of Bellevue would like those to be secured and so that we can protect them. We have some trespass issues down there. When we heard that the garage had burned to the ground, it was arson again, but it wasn't. There was a lightning strike and the fire department was able to verify that. we can, if you like, in October, we can have a more detailed discussion about Bellevue Farms. It's a difficult project. We created a great relationship with the Friends of Bellevue and the Sherman community. But as you know, it isn't in the city of Wildwood per se. It joins the city. We
But
have
it's Eaton. And, you know, it's great to help them out. And it is a resource, it can be a resource for southeastern Wildwood, even though it's not in our purview, but a quarter mil is kind of scary. So, yeah, whenever is appropriate. I don't want to take up any more of this meeting, but I think it's worth taking a look at it and getting a long-term plan together.
I have another question.
Councilmember Clark next, then Councilmember.
I'm done, guys. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Chair. Under Partner Park, the million in 2026, but what about 2024 for, you know, this demo or mitigation? But I think we're leaning toward demo after looking at the report, but I don't see anything in the box.
I'll admit, I may be a bit lazy, but Dawn Kaiser, our finance manager, she protects a lot of these columns, so in terms of Partner Park, planning and design, I have $50,000 for 2024. So we have a bid later on from Help Contracting for 17,000. So that would leave about $30,000+ for planning and design. I was going, like I said, I haven't updated, there's probably more information you want. Melanie and I haven't updated the capital improvement component on the budget yet. We were waiting for tonight to get input, and we'll do that tomorrow. So maybe I'll talk to her to see if I can fit that in there.
good. Okay, Councilmember Dodwell.
I lost what my train of thought was. Oh, on Bellevue Farms. The Friends of Bellevue, do we have any sense of the funds that they've earned and what they're contributing to the improvements in the area? I know they're doing a heck of a lot of undergrowth cutting and just trying to get the flora under control in the whole area. So I don't want to discount that effort. I applaud them for it, but I just was curious if we have some sense of what their contributions to this are. If the city of Wildwood, which does not own this property, is putting funds into it. My constituents may want to know why are we doing something outside the city?
I think you identified principally what they provide, and that's the many, many hours of volunteers
Mhm.
go out and basically maintain our, how about, let me put it a different way, address the invasives and try to restore it back to its, let's say, more native condition. And they do have fundraisers on occasion. They had a barbecue last October that they collected funds for their efforts. The primary source of funding is through the grant program at MDC. And that's where they've been able to collect thousands of dollars for this effort. But, you know, some days we hear from them and they just need us some roundup because they're short on funds, but they have a event schedule with themes, Open Space Council or Monarchs, different things, Audubon Society. So we always help there when we can.
Could we possibly place on our webpage the events that they do plan to have, or if they have work days, that they notify the city and we can post it, and residents who want to go and assist in those efforts could go if we just put it as a little blurb on our main webpage that people can scroll through.
I know they have like two major hacks, one in the fall and one in the spring
Mhm.
before it gets, after
Yeah,
the first freeze
terrible.
and then before the ticks and chiggers can feed
Yeah.
in. So, yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'd love to do it. Like I said, we'd like to think we're helping out. I also know they were a little discouraged when we met with them a few weeks ago. The 20 acres that they obtained, like 2 grants from MDC, and we got 1 from the MDC as well. At 20 acres that they removed all the cedars, got the bush honeysuckle out of there. It's just, it's starting to come back again already. They're just like, we're still working over here. Now we've got to think about over here. And it's just, so it's a big, big project.
Okay. Councilmember Clark?
Thank you. Are they 501c3? Because if they are, the prospectus probably has, that captured a lot of that detail, not all of it, like how much labor they put in and stuff for volunteers, but they're gonna have all their in-kind donations, they're gonna have all of the, any help from other people, plus whatever they've done to show their balance. Might be able to get that.
Well, I think the Bellevue Farms deserves a more detailed discussion because a number of years ago, there was a discussion. Should we really just maybe say this isn't a good fit for the city any longer and talk to St. Louis County? Then Friends of Bellevue came along and it kind of reinvigorated the effort. But I can certainly call them, and when we have that discussion, ask them to provide the details, from their filings.
Everybody good? And so Director Vudish, this was primarily for information and discussion, right?
Yeah, and more importantly, will we miss anything that's been kind of, I know there's probably sidewalks and other roads and bridges, but I was focused more so on what I thought were planning and parks components. But if there's anything we missed, we sure like to know.
Well, there was a roundabout Ward 8 that wasn't on here.
It'll be that. Rick Brown will take that charge.
Councilmember Marshall.
I just like maybe a little bit more information on the whole Route 66 roadside park. Sure. And how that gets to be $1 million. And you could probably throw a baseball to the village green from there. That's just a whole lot of money. And I kind of think the village green certainly was the big project first, but coming back a year after that for another $1 million that close, I think that's kind of a hard sell. Maybe it's the best way to go. I don't know. Just curious. $1 million is a lot of money. Of course, there's several millions on there, but
It is, and I can probably try to give you an explanation, but let me get you that information that was developed over the course of months with the Historic Preservation Commission. Councilmember Rambo was at some of the meetings and kind of watched how what we thought was going to be just a little way stop for bicyclists and hikers become this kind of thematic park, and it grew. It certainly has some assets that very few others parks like it would have, but yeah, once we saw the bottom line, we kind of shut everything down. And that was more the mayor and the city administrator at that time, but certainly did not get any objection from the department when we're struggling to get Village Green off the ground.
the only question, I just think that as we go forward, you're trying to lay it out for the next, usually the 5-year plan becomes a good 3-year plan to work from. And that just seems like a lot of money so close together and a lot of work on projects to do. So
Point taken, sir. Thank you.
that's it.
Councilmember Clark?
So I was just thinking, this may not be planning in parks, but there's so much of a planning component to it, but that extension road from the college to Manchester Road, is that all public works, going to be on the public works, or is that part of?
Good question. Obviously, at a recent council meeting, both Public Works and Planning talked about our desire to have an easement established from the new building on the community college campuses to Old Manchester Road. The easement is underway, but the intent was not necessarily to fund it, at least within this next 5-year window. The thought being is that the building doesn't open until 2025, as I recall. And I hope their projections are spot on and that building will fill. It should with STEM and health services. But I was thinking that we could probably wait at least through 2025 and then plan from there in 26, which would be, I think, the last year, excuse me, would be the midpoint of the 5-year window and then go from there.
Wasn't the plan to have them pay for that?
Well, that's the plan if they go to a phase 3. Our position is that if we don't plan ahead and at least have an easement, we'll never be able to do anything, even if we wanted just to put a walking path in there and use available parking on surrounding buildings, things like that, Pond Elementary. And then there's a parking lot on that neck that's owned by the community college that Rockwood School District bus drivers use. So I guess it, for lack of a better term, it was just a safety net. The college was confident from the traffic and study that it wasn't needed. And so we accepted that, but I just thought if we don't have an easement, we have nothing to discuss in the future.
Okay. All right, well, more to come on that. So thank you for the discussion on these matters and thank you for the information, Joe. And look forward to some more of the details coming forward. Meetings. So that takes us to the next item on the agenda under planning matters, which is the consideration of alterations to Center Avenue improvements. Rich?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, and I promise Melanie will be jumping in more shortly, so you won't have to listen to me all night. So, as you know, at the last city council meeting this September, approximately $40,000 was set aside for resurfacing program for existing Center Avenue. On the image that Melanie's been so kind to put on the screen, the Center Avenue is identified, and as you can see, kind of an interesting road. It's got a lot of twists and turns, and it's not necessarily a symmetrical right of way from either side of the center line, so to speak. And so what we're doing with that resurfacing is buying time. And this is the map. The street's too long to show, so I should explain. I apologize. This is the match line. So this is the southern end. This is the northern end. Here's the match line over here. So this is Stone Mill, Estates at Bordeaux. And this is the new Wesley Park project. And then up there is Old Town Park, both by Whalen Custom Homes. So City Council will agree to allow the Departments of Public Works and Planning to engage an engineer to update the Center Avenue plan. And that's what we've been doing over the last several months. And we've gotten to a stage where we've discovered several things. First, just from the perspective of the Department of Public Works and the Department of Planning, we were hoping to improve the potable water situation, and we talked to Missouri American Water Company. There is an existing 4-inch main that is on the west side of the road that goes for its entirety from Manchester Road up to Beach. And the water company is willing to replace that with a larger size main that, as you know, will increase flow and then address that volume and issue that we've heard about over the years as new projects have been proposed. We also did some analysis, and we have an issue with the slope of the driveways as they intersect with the new street that's being proposed. And so there will be a little 2-inch lip that allows the slope to be offset. And if you wanted to see what that looks like, the new part of Canterbury, the detached single-family dwellings, we did that there. I put a little, so it's the curb, a little 2-inch rise, and then the apron leading into the driveway. So that's been incorporated into the plan. And I show the driveway accesses with that little orange splotch there. We also were trying to incorporate a sidewalk on the east side. As you can see on the east side of Center Avenue, other than Mr. and Mrs. Barron's, and this is the original home, we've collected right of way from Whalen Custom Homes on Old Town Park and Wesley Park. So we thought with the negotiation with the Barron's, we may be able to do a sidewalk. Along with the sidewalk, we were going to try to improve the hill crest, which is a bit of an issue from a sight distance component. We were also doing some additional sanitary sewer work to 3 of the homes, and that's a responsibility of Wayland Custom Homes. So suffice to say, we came into the project with the redesign with a list of wishes. What we ended up finding out is that with the sidewalk on the east side of the road, no matter what we do in terms of that lip, particularly if the new water line is placed there, will basically make the driveways inaccessible. So what'll happen is people pull in, they'll just bottom out regardless of how hard we try. At least that's what the engineer said. So tonight, the department is presenting to you, part of this discussion, a decision made by Public Works and Planning that ultimately has to be agreed to and acted upon by City Council, that we eliminate the sidewalk as part of this particular construction. What we also determine is, given that we are still primarily working with a 30-foot right-of-way, that our typical streetscape requirements, the vertical curb and gutter, the wider sidewalks on both sides of the streets, we just can't fit it in. And so it won't look like a town center street if and when it is approved and built. Also, we're expecting MSD to require some stormwater management, and we're not exactly sure how we're going to do all of that, given we have at most a 40-foot right-of-way in some locations, but primarily a 30-foot right-of-way. And there are some areas where we're missing easements for the water company. We've kind of passed that on to them so that they can negotiate with the owners, because it's in everyone's best interest and they can talk water better than Public Works and Planning. And so the last item we've talked about is that we do want to still try to do street lights, because that was a consistent thing. We had heard how dark the street is for pedestrians and others during nighttime hours, particularly in the winter months when it gets dark so early. So to summarize, we started with that wish list, which was the 6 items. And ultimately, based upon the engineer's analysis and the redesign that he and the others have been working on, we won't be able to do a sidewalk. We won't be able to do a typical town center street. We're anticipating to have to find solutions for stormwater management. And we're missing a few easements to make the water line viable. But at the end of the day, we still like to try to do the street lights to make it a visible and safe area, given its width and the lack of sidewalks associated with it. So tonight, the department is seeking your response to these recommended outcomes. And if there is an agreement, a motion to allow us to proceed and present to City Council. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Director Vunich. Anybody have any comments or questions? Councilman Rambo?
Is there a sidewalk on East Avenue?
Yes.
Okay, and so it would just be, it's kind of like the folks on Center Avenue would have to understand that they won't have a sidewalk and they're going to be walking in the road, but they're likely, it sounds as though they're likely to sort of approve that because it keeps the character of their street on the way it was. Is that a reasonable assumption?
And we kind of started out, and many of you will remember this, when we were first negotiating with the owners for the transfer, they wanted the rural character to stay intact.
That's what I thought, yeah.
And that's kind of what we did. But as new people have moved on to the street, they're more akin to, why can't we have a sidewalk? Why can't we have street lighting? Why can't we have the things that would make it safer? And at that stage, we were saying, we don't know yet, but certainly we'll put it on our wish list. But as we found out, this is a tough retrofit, and we're doing the best we can to meet everybody's request.
So you're adding streetlights, so it'll be safer for pedestrians, but we're not doing sidewalks. Is there any easy way to like demarc the shoulder as, make it more pedestrian friendly, or because safety is the concern, because this is a through street, it looks like, and there are not very many people down there, but there are some. And they can walk around and go get on East Avenue and head up or head straight up. So I don't think the pedestrian traffic per se is a problem if they're willing to live with it, but it'd be nice to at least do what we can with striping or something to make it safer. Is that possible, or is that just a silly idea?
I think it's entirely possible. As you know, when we do resurfacing out in the rural areas, Scott Hummel, our street superintendent, and Rick Pound, our director, they're always trying to add a few more inches out on the edge.
Yeah.
And then they kind of stripe the same width, but we keep adding just a little bit more shoulder each time we do it, so that we're trying to increase a little bit of a safety zone. So I'll certainly bring that up with Rick.
I mean, this is not ideal, but I would support it because you guys did the best you could. So,
Yeah. If there's lights, if you're gonna have lights, I agree 100% with that, that put a striping or something to just create a perceived safety area
Yeah,
that
that
cars are
reflective
going, and
paint.
stay out of that area.
yeah, it might be helpful.
And having seen other areas where subdivisions have gone in, not in our cities per se like this, but in other cities throughout the US, where they don't really have sidewalks, but they're not heavily traveled streets. And I don't anticipate that Center's going to go much further than where it terminates on Bordeaux. You know, we're not talking about a really long length of.
Yeah.
So I think.
And I think they would probably be okay with eliminating the sidewalk so that they're not bottoming out every time they come.
Just everything wanted to kind of shift to the east, including the water line, the sidewalk, and then the 2-inch lip. And what we found is we're pretty much making it impassable for those people, particularly if they have, let's say, a passenger vehicle versus an SUV.
Okay. Well, with that being said, does anybody else have any comments or questions? Councilmember Marshall?
Any other options? I mean, they definitely want the lights, they definitely want sidewalks. Obviously, the new houses were built too close to the road. Any middle ground there that would be a win-win for them? I mean, it's gonna be town center, the lights would be provided by the city, we've done everything else. Is there any way to get them to give you up any more of that easement, or to move any more on a
Well, I haven't talked with Rick nor the water company, but when they're negotiating the easement or the water line, which would be on that east side, if we're going to improve or enlarge it, it might be an opportune time to go back and just say, you know, you're going to be giving an easement for this. Would you consider giving an easement, additional easement, so we could do a sidewalk? I do want you to know, we did get dedication when we did the 2 subdivisions that Mr. Wayland submitted. So that's why we have that wider stretch there. But do we get enough? That's a hard question.
what about making it one way?
No one's brought that up today.
I mean, some people don't like that, but that would give you the opportunity to have a sidewalk and have the one-way traffic going down to Bordeaux and come back up, or go the other way, whichever. You've only got how many lots?
Well, there'd be a range war on East Avenue if we did that, though. That's the thing. Neighbor against Hatfields against the McCoys.
I drove a heavy vehicle into Bordeaux one day and I got stopped because they thought I was a construction worker coming through. And I'm like.
You'd have to make East Avenue one way too.
It's just one of those issues that, sometimes we just keep jumping through hoops where some people, if you're used to it, there's a lot of streets that are one way. And when you only have that many houses on it, do you want a sidewalk, or are you willing to drive through? I don't know, just an idea. I'm sure you guys have done a great job with it. Just curious.
I don't feel like it because it's like, but cobbling together a lot of things, and sometimes it's not as easy as just have one project boundary and you set of boundaries for a project. You have one developer and it's easy to do. I'll ask Rick about the converting it to one way, and I do want to, I failed to mention, Rick did review the memorandum and concurred with the 5 items.
Councilman Clark?
So this may be a crazy idea, but would they be willing to backyard easement between these, the back, where they back up to each other and just take the sidewalk down between the backs?
The water or.
Yeah, well, the sewer is in their backyards. The sanitary sewer that the city did, the neighborhood improvement district, that's where we are in the back there, so we'll take a look.
Okay, great idea, actually. I like that. So Director Vunich, then you're looking for guidance on sending this to council. Do you want us to approve the recommendations you've made with the exception of looking into the sidewalk option a little further? Would you like more time in general?
I think I'd like more time. A couple of the suggestions I think we need to explore just so we can say we covered that base. So for purposes of tonight, I think the discussion was what I needed. So thank you.
Just postpone it and let you guys get information. Are you okay with that?
Yep.
Okay. All right, moving right along, then that takes us to the next item, sequence of reoccupancy permit program.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, recently the city council endorsed a reoccupancy inspection program for all types of dwellings, whether single family, detached to multiple family. Our buildings will number of units associated with each of them. The discussion at that meeting was for the city attorney to draft legislation for that implementation. And I know that has begun in its early stages. So tonight, what I wanted to do with the committee is just kind of go through what I see as the next steps. And then make sure that we've covered what you all remember from that meeting and anything that's come up to your attention as we talked about this over the course of the last couple of months. So first and foremost, per the video from that meeting, the next step is to complete the preparation of legislation. Obviously, if that legislation doesn't pass, the rest of the steps aren't necessary. But if the legislation does pass, then the department would like to have the committee have the opportunity to talk with a code official from St. Louis County. The gentleman that would attend is the municipal services coordinator between county and its contractual agents. And we've had conversations, him and I'd like him to come here and basically explain what they can or can't do. The cost associated with it, if we were to use them, again, for contractual purposes, and just have an opportunity so you all could ask questions before we got too far along in the development of the framework and the steps in the process. I think the next step then is to develop those parameters as it would be for the implementation. What types of forms on website, paper, obviously website, but just those things that we need to do so that when somebody comes in or goes online, they have a simple process with the available forms all set to go. And then once we have that kind of framework, I would suggest that we do at least one, if not two, public meetings and just let people know, here's what we're thinking, here's the legislation, here's the steps in the process. Before we get too far along, let us know what you're thinking. From that, then revise any of the steps that we have in place that we thought were appropriate. Maybe we missed something, maybe it's a better way to do it. We'll hear from our community and that. And then ultimately, once we refine the process and parameters, and with the legislation in place, we begin implementation. So from that perspective, this is fairly straightforward. The only action I'm asking for tonight is when the legislation is passed, I'd like authorization to invite the individual to one of our meetings. I'll make sure he understands, we only have a certain amount of time. Do a brief presentation, question answers, I think is more important. But I think it would be to our benefit to hear from somebody that's implemented it and the benefits and things they struggle with as they started that program. I say that because St. Louis County's had it for a while, but not a long while. So I think it might be applicable for us to basically learn from their mistakes and build on their successes.
Okay,
Thank
so you're looking for us to authorize you to invite a member of the county council to come in and speak to us?
And that's all contingent upon the legislation passing. I don't know if the legislation will be at the October meeting of city council. I'm thinking probably more November. So this may be after the first of the year.
Okay, so the planning and parks has been tasked with structuring the implementation of this program, should it pass. Okay. So with that being said, do we want to?
Our
is there any-
MyGov expert will be the one that will.
Any discussion regarding authorizing Director Vunich to schedule that, assuming it passes? I guess at this point, we don't need to do anything until we see what happens with council. Councilmember Martin?
I don't understand why the council is passing this. We don't even know how it's gonna work. And I've been around for a long time. I know I'm old and grumpy, but when you start putting legislation out there and you can't answer anybody about how it's gonna work, that's pretty stupid government. There's no common sense there. And I just could not get over when we bring this up to vote. This should have been worked out till we said this is exactly what it was, then decide to bring a legislation for it. People voted on it. I don't think they had a clue. How are you going to do it? What's going to be inspected on it? There's a difference between a one person and a two person. I mean, I got trustees going crazy because I bet the other day I had 3 phone calls on my cell phone. One just cash out right for your house. I know these houses are being bought up and they're all rentals. And you just watch, but we're gonna go ahead and make something and tell you guys to make it work. And people are gonna go crazy. So I'd love to know how a renter or a person who's renting their house, what's the process look like? So that you could at least explain it to the trustees who are calling and saying, who's gonna be paying for these things? So I don't have any answers on it, but I've never seen us as a city put the legislation out and then say, we're gonna figure it out. Because that's just not. And on top of the trash thing, that is a hard one to explain. So for what it's worth, I was the only one who voted against it, but I don't understand why we think we're gonna put it out there and vote something that can be enforceable and not even know how we're gonna explain it to the people that are gonna do it. So it's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I would actually to follow up on that. When folks are buying homes and going through that process, and I see this all the time in my business, but there's, different cities have different regulations regarding occupancy permits and different things that are required. And it can become a nightmare when it's a confusing situation to where the real estate agents don't know what is necessary for the folks to move in once they've closed on the house and what steps needed to be taken before. And sometimes if the parties involved aren't aware of that, they don't go through the process that they should have, and then they close on the property and then they go for the occupancy permit. And then there's something that comes up with the city that's an issue that could have or should have been addressed through the process of the purchase that wasn't. And so I've just seen it happen in other municipalities around St. Louis where there's been big issues that have turned into lawsuits regarding buyers and sellers because of an occupancy permit process that wasn't understood by one or both of the real estate agents.
It's not that it's bad. I think everybody.
No, I agree.
I
but
just
it
don't
needs to
think we
be-
know how to do it.
I think it needs to be clarified, very clear on who has to abide by it and what that process looks like.
Do we pick a specific date that it needs to come back to council?
No.
I don't think we did. So I think step A needs to be moved to step E. And it goes back to council after this committee has completed the work to clearly define steps that the residents need to go through and the methods that the city will take so that we're not just throwing something out there to confuse our constituents, realtors, whoever. Let's put together what we're doing and then have the council approve that. So I concur with the conversation.
Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, I thought that's what we were doing, was to get that started and that it was sent back here to do that, so that we would put all this together. And so I agree with you that, well, I would say put A at the bottom, but A would be to come up with a written purpose and objective to start with, because if we're answering residents, what do we say is, why are we doing this? Why did this come up? Why are we doing it? And we need to know that, plus maybe a definition page that tells, so that we talk the language of this.
Perhaps would it make more sense, Director Vinich, if at these folks' points, maybe we invite the person from the county first to come in and talk to us about what the impetus was for them implementing it and what that implementation looked like, and what their parameters are, so that we can then have, because I think until we hear that, we're not really in a position to have a thoughtful conversation about the details that we would like to or not like to include in the whys behind it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I personally feel it was appropriate to, I take your point completely, Ed, but I think it was appropriate to vote on it because it sent it back to this committee to hash all these details out. And so we hear from the county, but I will say that I thought we should have taken it further and done single family, because the inspections are often manipulated to make the sale, and something that's a sort of a hands-off objective look at whether there are banisters and the outlets have grounded, are grounded, and just those kinds of simple things cost $90. It's an occupancy permit, and you have to do it every time you change residence in a home. But this is for rental only, which makes it easier. You're a renter, not a rentee, you're the renter. And so every time you get a new renter in there, you have to pay $90 for the city to come in and check the outlets and so on and so forth. It seems reasonable. And I think it's easy to explain. We just need to find out how they explained it and replicate that. And I don't think it's going to be much.
We don't know how many rental properties we have in the city, do we?
Should be nice.
Well, it was a while back when Mr. Bosworth was proposing the new North Latitude 38. And he had been to the Development and Zoning Review Committee, and they did a pushback on the rental component. And he mentioned that within a 5-mile radius, he thought there was like 300 plus rental homes in which would be entirely Wildwood. So I think there's more than we had. It surprised me when he said that.
I bet I will tell you, I just know every week it's just increasing. And the people that are coming in and renting them on the weekend, just down the street from me, the guy who sold his house, they wrote a whole bunch of tickets the other night, but the trash guy comes and there's like 10 trash cans out there, but there's nobody there. They just come in on the weekends and do their partying, and then they leave everything and they go. So the police are coming now, but from what I understand, at least in Ward 5, there's a lot of that where people are renting these properties out. And I know that a lot of the trustees don't even know who they are, because they can't figure out who's a renter versus who the homeowners are.
They do that.
Well, they're just outright buying them.
They're putting them on an Airbnb and.
Yeah.
Well, we disallowed that. I mean, that's illegal in
That's the
Wildwood.
case. Short-term rentals, the only one we allow is a bed and breakfast under a CUP.
I'm not saying these people are legal at all. I just know that on a Friday night, there's all kind of license plates from out of town. And somebody said, oh, well, it's an Amway sales conference. I mean, everything would be illegal about it. But again, and then you hear, well, there's another one down this other street and there's another one over here. So I don't know. But I just think those are I think the subdivisions and the people would love to have some kind of control on it. But where do you start? And I think that's why maybe the guy from the county can say, this would be a good way to do it. And a couple of years ago, I had 2 houses going under the different inspections and stuff between the fire districts and the others. And, if you're going to buy the house, and you want to sell the house, you're going to get those inspections done. But it's everything from having the concrete on top of the fireplaces checked, to have that remortared if it's been a long time. But that these rentals, they're just paying cash on these. There's no inspections for a lot of these. And these are big corporations. They're just buying houses up and they're just renting them.
Yeah, so that's why we need a rental occupancy program.
I agree. It should include single families. If it's rentals, it should include all rentals.
Yeah, if it's not a primary residence.
Is there a way to have maybe the police department or somebody from the department? I don't know who would do it, but to your point, and the fact that short-term rentals like Airbnb and VRBO are not legal in Wildwood, have we done any investigative, like looked online on
Try
these
to, try to
sites?
rent a neighbor's house.
Well, just you can search by map geographically to see if there's any residences in Wildwood that have their homes listed on Airbnb or VRBO for short-term rentals. That'd be an easy way to figure
See
it out.
what's in West Glen Farms.
If I may, I've looked into it a bit in Wildwood, far more in Manchester. And part of the problem with, Airbnb and VRBOs is that it says, in Wildwood, and a lot of times, like we had one in Wildwood that said that it was not in Wildwood, it was in Chesterfield or something. But that being said, it doesn't have the address of these
Doesn't.
properties until after you rent them.
Ah.
So we don't actually know where they're at.
It doesn't
And
show it
so-
on the map
it gives you
specifically.
like an approximation of
Gotcha.
location, but no, they don't want to share that information until after you've already rented it. And so it's challenging to prove that they're, have an Airbnb unless, their property is very unique looking. They do have photos.
Councilwoman Clark?
So, something just popped in my head that if a person rents out their house, a business or a person, especially just, I bought the house, I'm moving, I'm gonna rent my house. Does that person have to have a business license to do that?
No.
No, not to rent your home.
Now, if you're an owner and you have a boarder, that's a home occupation. And you can have up to one boarder. Key component of that is all parts of the house have to be accessible to the boarder, just like if they're a family member.
Perhaps we could send a map of the city of Wildwood along with the ordinance to VRBO and Airbnb and tell them that they're complicit in a crime.
That'll
If
work.
somebody rents it through.
They'll get
their
right back to
site.
us.
I'd love
Send it
get
to
the
customer
address.
service.
They were there Friday
Yeah.
night. I heard the police had wrote a bunch of tickets Friday night, but I was more concerned about how the trash is gonna get picked up on Thursday. Cause they're just lined up everywhere. Somehow they got it that Thursday, or Friday night, I guess, after Labor Day. But that's what I've been told by 2 or 3 neighbors, cause I don't have any reason to get down there, but it's an older guy had lived there. He didn't see him out very often. And then on the weekend, there's just all kinds of out-of-state cars parked there now.
That's an enforcement issue. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a separate.
So I guess then, this has been a good discussion, actually. Thank you, everybody.
Need to go.
With that being said, considering that it's not affecting primary residents, and this is strictly for the changing of renters, would the committee be okay sending legislation back to council to vote on that and adding the single family component? And still having the county person come in to talk to us in case we wanted to expand it to include all properties at some point. I think if it's just rental properties that are long-term rentals and it's only when a renter is changing and it's a simple focus, I agree with you, Rob, on that, regarding just having some minimal layer of protection to make sure like that we're not having slumlords.
Yeah.
Well, I could see going forward on new homes, I mean, if that were the ordinance going forward, that if you're buying a new house and there is a city inspection. But I think what people are concerned about is the city putting in an inspection where every house we're gonna go to each house. And
It's just rental.
charge.
Well, a new
Well,
home
I
is
understand.
gonna be code compliant. And we have some very old homes, like my aunt's home was built in 1963, and when she died, didn't have grounded outlets as one of many examples. That's a legitimate safety
Yeah.
question.
I had to put 8 GFIs only because my plugs were too low to the floor. And the house was only 23 years old. So there's a lot of that out there, but that was picked up by the fire department when they did the inspections. So I think it's something, I just think the way we communicate is gonna be the
Yeah.
challenge.
So if we send I'm sorry, I'm talking out of turn here, but if we send legislation back to council, we ought to have what Ed has suggested, our ducks in a row. This is the process. It's documented, and we can communicate that, because once we vote on it, otherwise we're gonna get
Sure.
people saying, what are you voting? We don't even know what we're supposed to do, and et cetera, and that's a reasonable
Yeah.
point. So
I see it on,
I will make a motion. I move that the committee continue to work with planning to develop the steps that a rental property will need to go through to obtain corrective inspection, get city authorization to be a rental unit. And then we present that legislation back to city council for a final vote.
Teresa.
Well, I would second that, but I also wanted to make the point that maybe because like of your aunt's house and an age, if we ever did go with a single family, I would say, you know, put it at a, if it was built before this year, because I have had rental houses and have to do those inspections, and then they come back and I end up having to spend more on the house because they found, oh, well, there's too many weeds over here. And to clean it up for things that really weren't a problem, you know, for the next person coming in, but they find all these little things that aren't even a problem. And I think about my home, I could see a lot of things around there that they might think, well, this, you need to clear this out, or you need to do this or this.
Well, these
When
would
it
not
really
be,
doesn't have to be, but I know that your motion, and I'm going off the motion, but that point about the single family, I say keep that separate, do just what Katie said, and I second that, not bringing it back in the single family homes.
By the wayside, we're not talking
Yeah.
about that.
Right,
I
right.
do think it's a good idea and don't, because somebody that's not as responsible as yourself and maybe a little cheap would put in an unauthorized basement renovation and there's no GFCIs, the wiring might be aluminum, just, you know, all kinds of, there's all kinds of, you know, problems that homeowners cause, and the only way to catch that is if you transition from one owner to another. That would be the basis for my advocacy for a single family occupancy inspection, but.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. So the motion on the floor, as Katie presented it, was to have the department come back and have a further conversation with the committee. Joe, could you bring to Councilmember Rambo's point earlier, you know, I think if we can make it as simplified of a process as possible, that would be easiest to communicate and implement. If come back with, I think, what's it, $90 or whatever it is, for what would it be included in that minimal layer of inspection for those rentals, and what would it entail, and what would you foresee from the department standpoint the most effective and efficient way for that to be handled, so that we can then, and maybe then in the October meeting, if you can bring that information back, we can talk about it further. I think we've had a pretty healthy conversation tonight that allows us to move forward with the motion that's on the floor, and then perhaps finish the conversation in October and have something to take back to council. Unless anybody else have anything further?
Just a couple other comments. I think the first write-up was really good. That showed the different things that would be included. But I think it'd be interesting. We got three different fire districts. What is on their inspection that each one of them do before you get the new house? And then what's on the county one for rental properties? And what's different there? Rob's right. I mean, some of the fire district one drives you crazy, 4 inches between spindles and all that stuff, but from a safety standpoint, but they don't catch some of the other stuff that maybe the rental ones would, but maybe to be able to look at, and then what is the provisions for commercial, like Sandalwood Creek, all those condos? How often are those inspected? And then, you know, because that's very different, but that's the first thing residents are going to say is, well, wait a minute. You know, what about these rental properties now? Are they being inspected or not? And whether it's a 3-year cycle or however they do it, and who does that inspection? Is that only the fire district from a safety standpoint?
And we can do that comparison list, and we're real fortunate. Melanie's had a great deal of experience in Maryland Heights, Town and Country in Manchester, so I'm gonna depend on her a lot to kind of give her the background and experience she's had. So yeah, we can put something together for you.
Great. Well, the motion's on the floor. It's been
Expertise,
seconded
Melanie.
by Councilmember Clark. I think we've had a good discussion unless anybody, seems like we got the directive pretty much in place, unless anybody else has anything further to add. Would all in favor of the motion, say aye.
I,
Aye.
Any objections? And any abstentions? All right, well, thank you very much. Look forward to seeing that information in October, Joe and Melanie. All right, that brings us to the next, the old business, which is just for information typically, right? Recent development trends within the city of Wildwood. Does anybody have any questions or comments related to that? Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, I've got a question. So it seems like every time we get this report, that there are certain wards that have very few permits. And my question is, does that mean that those wards that have very few permits aren't doing anything? Or are they not getting permits for what they're doing?
Probably both.
It seems like it's a same thing every time. That's the ward.
And obviously Ward 8 has the bulk of the permits that we issue, particularly for new single-family detached dwellings and things along those lines. And oftentimes what you see then after that, once the new dwelling's in place, the home builder usually charges such as an exorbitant amount for a deck or things along those lines. They go out and get another contractor to do the deck, and we issue a permit for the same house just after the one for the single-family dwelling. There is probably a good number of people that just don't get permits. And that may be in the areas where, rural areas primarily, where people don't notice. And
Those rural areas, 1 in 6 have lots of permits. But I'm sorry, I talked on.
so I would say both. There's probably, but if we do a zoning authorization or a building permit, it's on the list. So that's all I can tell you.
Thank you very much.
I have one other question on this one too.
Yeah, Councilmember Dow.
Can you give us just a little update on the 2 temples that are sort of being completed, but not really being.
You were definitely there for this one.
You beat me to the punch.
Or can we not discuss it because we're in legal issues with them?
So the Durga Temple at 109 in Route BA, I did talk to one of the leadership group from the temple, and they are frustrated with their contractor. They're struggling to know why it's taken so long as well.
Okay.
They were calling me, not so much to just lament, but they are getting ready to close that section of Old Etherton Road that has that acute angle with Route 109. And so we're working with them on that. So they are getting closer because that was one of the last things on the list of requirements. And so I don't have a good guess on occupancy, and it's a rough site. I do send the code enforcement officers out there, but it's kind of counterproductive if we send the workers off the site. There's usually just a couple, not a lot of crews there, a lot of members of a crew. And they shut down and then we lose more time. So there is progress being made. The Murugan Temple at Turkey Track Road and Route 109. We had a meeting with their leadership team last week. They have a comment letter from the city that's about 3 pages long. They're not generally responding to the public space requirements. They're generally responding to the concerns from the neighbors about proximity of the parking lot. And so we spend a lot of time just going back and forth saying, why can't we address this in a better manner? But they are moving forward with the plans. They said they're going to get back and address all of the comments on this second review. And surprisingly, at that meeting last week, they were only talking about the priest quarters and meeting area. They want to shell out the temple now and get that started, which was a surprise because for the most part, they are talking about. So they did have their ceremony on the site. I think some got invitations to it. And I know Ms. Clark's been contacted by the residents that have joined the temple site, may want to meet with Mr. Brost and her to express their concerns.
On the Durga Temple, just want to make sure, where is the entrance and egress going to be off of BA and not off of 109, right?
Yes, BA to Old Etherton, so
Okay,
state would not allow them to access Route 109.
okay.
And is there some type of provision? I know, because this is the Durga one specifically, because I've asked about this one in the past, but we're well over a year behind schedule. I would imagine, right? Is there some type of provision, or is it necessary perhaps to take a look at it from the city standpoint to implement some type of, if the landowner is blaming the contractor and the contractor probably has a separate explanation as to why it's taking so long. Like, is there a way to hold some accountability by way of fines for if we approve a site plan and everything from the city's side is given with permits and stuff, and we're basing that off of a timeline that we're being given, barring some, obviously if there's a delay that they can document that verify that makes sense, that's one thing, but to just be, and I say this because I drive past that site every single day. And I have complaints from, it's not my ward, but I have complaints from people I know that live there that are just like, weren't excited about the color scheme that was going in there anyway. But aside from that, it's like, now we've got this eyesore of something that looks like it's potentially being developed, but it's not really, because there's one person there a couple days a week. And it's gone on for now 2 years, and they're still, I mean, you could look at it. The progress they make is so incrementally small over the course of months. It's not even, it's negligible. I don't see them being able to occupy that place anytime in the near future. If they maintain the continued level of work that's being done. So, I guess for them to just say we're frustrated with our contractor, like, what does that mean? And what type of vetting was done with this contractor, to where if it takes another year or two, do we just have to sit here and go along with whatever they tell us?
Recognizing these meetings are recorded, Melanie has experience with their particular contractor, and it was very similar to this, I believe.
Very similar.
So from that perspective, what we do is we depend on St. Louis County as part of the building permit process, because the initial permit, as I recall, is issued for 12 months. And then if you have to then, if there's not progress, you're going to have to extend. So we depend on them to kind of keep track of the progress being made. That the current permit is still active, so they've kept up with it. But that doesn't address your concern about just the slowness of the progress and the condition of the site.
Yeah, my question is, can the city implement some
Sure.
type of parameters that would, upon going through the process of approving a site plan for a developer of any kind, and then it's based on what the developer is going to do with the property and what the timeline is that they're going to do it with, so where we don't just have, because otherwise we could potentially have, a subdivision or something, and they could say, yeah, it's going to take us 1.5 years and end up taking 10 years just because they're going to put up one house but if our hands are tied to be able to do anything outside of just taking their word for it.
What I would suggest, with all of your authorization, I'll ask John Young. He has other clients, obviously, just say, is there something we can do? And if there is, we'll have something brought back for a future agenda.
Yeah, something that would just implement some level of accountability that would deter something just taking, a few weeks or months is one thing. If there's a
COVID was in their favor for a while.
Well,
Yeah.
we've had problems with subdivisions.
Yeah.
That go through that process too, where 1 or 2 homes get built and then 20 years later, there's still nothing else there. Roads degrade and,
Another developer comes in and buys part of it.
yeah.
And I agree with that too, but at least there it's just land. Here we've got a building that is, by the time it's finished, it's gonna be needing to be
Redone.
upgraded. And wasn't there an issue with the color of the shade of pink that was used? Was that ever fixed?
Yes, they went back to what was originally approved by the Architectural Review Board. They were going with a lighter color
Mhm.
that was mistakenly placed on the building, on a portion of the building. He stopped that work. The leadership of the temple sent in the color choices, the original and what was on the building. And they ultimately decided to go, well, basically what we told them, if you want the new color, you have to go back to ARB. They didn't want to do that, so they basically repainted what had been painted and stayed with the new colors.
All right, well, we digress, but that was a good conversation. I think, like I said, I think it's important to have eventually some parameters in place that would hold some level of accountability for projects. Councilwoman Clark?
On the Mergen Temple. So we have this list of things that you just mentioned. Pages, and I've read those, but are we going to sit down with Mergen Temple people, the leadership again? I know you had the meeting last week, but are we going to go through, and is there a timeline for those things? Can I be a part of that meeting? And so that I can hear what they're saying and I have some answers to give to the people, because they have legitimate concerns. The neighbors do. They do want to know something right now. They said, let's hold off on the meeting with just me and Larry until we can get some more of these answers.
Certainly. If any of you are inclined, you're more than welcome. You know, we set these meetings up sometimes in just a matter of a few days, but you're always welcome if you have an interest. And they're updating the plan. What I would suggest is once they submit it, let us review it to see what we've got. And we'll set up another meeting. They usually want the meeting more so than us, because we think the comment letter is pretty self-explanatory. Typically, they just want to come in and argue. I say that without malice. It's just, well, we can't do that. And why? And well, we don't want to, is usually.
Two other, just
Sure,
quick.
go ahead.
Greenberg Development Plan, after those revisions are made, does that go back to ARB?
I don't think it's
It
been
hasn't
there.
been.
We saw it once in ARB.
I think that was just a pre-review.
We saw one that he said, it was like a picture of lots of blue.
Yeah, the colors.
Yeah, the colors were
Mhm,
very vibrant. And
I think so. Because it was so harder.
then the second one was, the reserves is on this list over and over and over with no updates. Does it need to stay on this list?
We'll certainly pull it off and wait until something happens.
Well, I'm just asking, I'm not saying it needs to be.
I've not heard from Payne Family Homes, now Fisher Homes. I don't believe Travis or Melanie have talked with them either. I don't know, for a guess, I think that they may be pulling out of the project, but that's just a guess. And in terms of the site development plan, well, for the mixed use development by Greenberg Cone, that'll be at the Planning and Zoning Commission on October 2nd. Green Street has some changes and now they have a residential developer for the single family dwellings. So there's some changes. So there'll be an ordinance amendment request there at P&Z. It'll be at City Council in November. And the site plan will probably follow shortly thereafter. And ARB, they can do it on a parallel course. They can start as soon as they want. They don't necessarily need to wait until everything else is in place.
On the routes, if you take that off the, is there a way to find out can we call them or something to find out about the reserves? Because people ask all the time. And I mean, even in coffee with the mayor, they're asking what's going on with that development. And I don't have any answers for them.
Bill Allen is one of their vice presidents, so I'll give him a call and ask. There's an update he can provide.
All right. Well, thank you very much for everybody's comments and questions, and looks like we'll be getting some additional information from that. So let's move on to the next item, which is new business under park matters. And Ms. Ripito, we are looking at an update on the Tour de Wild Tour de Wildwood event. A little bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah. Well, that's good, because now I don't have to get through it as easily. So thank you, and Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I will try to be brief. Some of you may recall that the Tour de Wildwood was not on the 2023 events that were proposed the end of last year. This event has taken place annually in some form since 2005. It's been held on the first Sunday in October and consists of both a long and short run that can be completed in about 5 hours for the longer run from the start time. Historically, the city of Wildwood has partnered with Missouri Bicycle Pedestrian Federation, and they've managed all of the registrations, marked the course, provided the SAG wagon to assist riders and things like that. And the city managed all of the police services, food, drink, venue, and aid stations, and coordinated with Babbler State Park. Big Shark provided bicycle checks before the site started the events. And in previous years, the entry fee was $50 per participant, and all of that was retained by the Federation. Well, because this event has not gone on, without issues in the past over the course of years, and has been a relatively high cost when given the challenge of balancing the budget in 2023 and having cuts happen in parks. The department concluded that changes would need to be made in order to be able to keep this a viable event here. And the good news is that the Federation City have worked together to continue to be able to offer this event. I guess that's good news for many that love the event, and maybe bad news for some of our residents that aren't such a big fan. So in order to do so, some changes needed to be made. The first being the budget. And that in discussing this with the Federation, we decided that it would be okay to up the participation to 350 people as opposed to 300. And the fee would be raised to $55 instead of $50, which is neither of which did we feel were dramatic increases or would have a negative impact. So those funds will now all be utilized to offset the cost for the event, and the proposed budget that's in your packet that they provided to us shows a 60-40 split of the profits. So it would be $1,580. But that being said, this isn't really an event that we're looking to make a profit at per se, and the city will still continue to provide police, and staff time would be included in that, as well as coffee, snacks in the morning. But the rest of it, the lunches and everything would be the responsibility of the partnership. The city won't be providing t-shirts or jerseys or anything this year. That will also be on the partnership. And so the city will still provide the rest of everything that they had been providing, which is pretty minimal. The staff time required for setup and takedown is minimal in comparison to a lot of our other events. And this year there will also be a special tribute. Let me share my screen here. So this event will be very special for the city of Wildwood in that due to the untimely death of Paul Wachowski, I apologize for butchering, and David Glacier. This year's event will be honoring them in remembrance of them. And as you can see, it's on their advertisements. It is also on their shirts. So the Federation will actually be handling all of that, and they've handled all of the registration and such. And then the only other change that was discussed, but because it was so late in the year when we discussed it, we didn't really have time to implement it, is we were talking about getting sponsorship for the event, and not necessarily just from Wildwood businesses, but from reaching outside of Wildwood, in hopes that this would bring an added bonus to the event of having these sponsors there, but also it would highlight to said sponsors how amazing Wildwood is, and maybe encourage them to bring their business here, because we do have the support for it and our residents around. I think that this is a great area for such business. And so in summary, The Tour de Wildwood has been a longstanding event. It's been well attended, and the changes that were made it feasible for the city to continue doing it with minimal cost and minimal staff time. And the only issue that remains is not necessarily an easy one to fix, and that's the pushback that, the issues caused with having the event take place on a rural roads. It's not always so widely accepted. But the city and the police will do our very best to keep, both the residents and the participants safe throughout the event. And so we'll plan on moving forward with this event. And so tonight, the department is not seeking any action, but rather just wanted to provide the committee with an update and answer any questions that you may have. And so with that, that concludes our presentation, but Mr. Greenwich, I'm both happy to answer any
Yeah,
questions.
Councilmember Ottenberg's had his hand up, and then Councilmember Rambo. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. Yeah, all right. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Ripito, I believe the shirt answers my question, but at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that the Tour de Wildwood typically takes place on the first Sunday of October, but in fact, this year we're holding it on the second Sunday of October, correct? On the 8th?
That is correct.
Okay, super. Thank you for that clarification. And then also, last year for the Tour de Wildwood, we still had a number of old bike jerseys from previous tours. And we set them out on a table and did manage to sell a number of them. I'm wondering if we still have some of those old jerseys left, and can we put them out on a table, maybe near the registration area, and sell them, even if it's at a good price, and hopefully earn a little bit of additional revenue.
Sure, we will look into that and see if we have extra ones. We've actually been doing that with a lot of our other events as well, is selling Wildwood swag that is left over from other events, and it's
Sure.
been very popular. So I think it's an excellent suggestion.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Councilmember Rambo.
Yeah, every serious road cyclist has experienced road rage types of events. A Slurpee in the back and worse. And part of that I think a lot of that could be prevented if we publicize the routes ahead of time, and find some way to show the exact route, maybe even mark them with the date. So that residents can understand that, hey, there may be some additional cycling traffic here, and we need to enforce the rule that it should be a peloton. It should be people, one right after the other instead of 3 or 4 abreast, which is, it gripes me, and I've been a road cyclist for 60 years, and Scott can probably say the same thing. It's just a courtesy thing. So we could do better to manage expectations from both ends and solve a lot of these complaints. There's always going to be folks that they just don't like bicycles no matter what. But part of the reason they don't is because people are riding 4 or 5 abreast and chatting and going 6 miles an hour and not leaving room for them to pass. So that's just do we have the routes?
Yeah,
Can we start put them on the website and
Yeah.
maybe, I think it makes sense maybe
Kind of one of
to
the-
mark them on the roads, put the signs out.
Sometimes we have marked them in the past. I've seen.
yeah. I was gonna say, they
Signs.
usually come out a few days in advance at least and mark the route that's on the roads.
So that as you travel down the road, you see that they're going to be coming through on such and such a day.
Yeah, Sunday, the 8th, we should probably drive the other way. Some, kind of thing. And, solve a lot of problems before they start, so.
3 and 4 abreast on Austin Ford. It's thrilling.
Right on Strecker, 6 or 7 abreast.
Councilman Clark.
Yeah, speaking of marking the roads, I've had, I haven't seen this myself, but a number of residents have mentioned to me that the paint on the roads doesn't come off. And I know that Captain Mendel was looking into an alternative paint, chalk paint or something. Have we found something?
Spray chalk. So it comes out of a can, just like spray paint, but it's chalk. It lasts anywhere from about 10 to 14 days, and then it just goes away. So we told both Pedal to Cause, which is the other major event this fall, it'll use our roads, and Tour de Wildwood, that's what they have to use. Minimal amount of marks, signage is preferred, and then more importantly, get it on their smartphones, smartwatches, so they can basically don't have to depend on those things as much as they have in the past. So we're trying to
Thank you.
be sensitive because it came up at Coffee with the Mayor about Hart Road. And the reason there isn't the route maps on our website yet is we're trying to alter the route to stay off Hart Road. So
It's been 2 months and coming strong. Each time.
All right, thank you, guys.
So can I ask one more question?
Yeah, go
real
ahead.
Quickly, the used to be called the Moonlight Ramble, then it was the Midnight Ramble, and then it kicked off at 10:30 the last couple of years in downtown St. Louis. It used to be 20,000 riders after a while, like in the 80s and so forth. Anyway, it got canceled last weekend because they didn't have enough staff to block off the roads, and drivers were getting out of their cars and moving the sawhorses and stuff and just driving through the roads, and they didn't think it was safe, so they had to call it off, which really, there were several thousand people there waiting to take off, and now they've got to get refunds and all those kinds of things. Are we confident? I mean, 350 people is not a whole lot more than 300, but I'm just making sure that we have our process in good order, and we're not going to have an embarrassing disaster like that.
well, if Officer Gelder was still here, he'll tell you that they prepare for this event well before.
Okay.
The
Okay.
actual couple of months before. And since 2005, we've had success with this event. The reason it is limited to 300, now 350 riders is 1 year we had 900 show up at Lafayette High School. And the police had a major issue with just compliance with the rules of the road. And they came to the department and said, we can't do this that way again. First step was cancel, because it was gas that day. But inevitably, we came to a solution that with 300 on the two courses, it's a manageable number, and I think 350 will be the same. And we're anticipating the bump just because of Paul and David and the relationship they had with the bicycle.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you for that. Councilor Rottenberg, I saw your hand went up and went back down. Are you good?
No, thank you very much, Chair, but Councilmember Clark and Director Vunich answered my questions regarding the markings on the road, the arrows and so on. And so we're good on that. And Councilmember Rambo mentioned, some of the signage and so on. So those were the exact same things I was going to bring up. So we're good. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, guys, again for a good conversation, and thank you, Mr. Ratone, for your presentation, which will take us straight into the next item on the agenda, which is to schedule a ribbon cutting event for the new pedestrian bridge and trail segments in Ward 8.
Okay, it's me again. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee. After several delays in changes in design, construction on a long-awaited pedestrian bridge in Cherry Hills commenced in January of this year and was completed in late spring. Just to provide a bit of background information on the pedestrian bridge, the city has always been looking for ways to improve its trails and networks and do it at as little cost as possible. With the development of 2 subdivisions on either side of a small drainage area, the enclaves at Cherry Hills and the manors at the meadows of Cherry Hills, the city requested these developers to provide funding to construct a pedestrian bridge that would link the trail together on both sides of that. So after some planning and designing and engineering delays, the project and construction was completed, and this project was designed not only intended to benefit like necessarily the residents in the surrounding area, but it benefits Wildwood as a whole as it connects our trails and makes the city far more walkable. And it's a great alternative for runners, walkers, bikers, rather than Manchester Road. So as it turns out, the bridge not only increases connectivity, but it also turned out to be a beautiful addition to the surrounding area. After so many discussions that I have listened to regarding this bridge, I finally went out to go look at it myself, and I have to say, it's not just a pedestrian bridge. It is really impressive. I actually brought in a few photographs that I'll share, if you don't mind. Yeah, it's gorgeous, and it goes off to a little turnaround for the trail, and there's a little bench down there, and then on the other side, the trail goes up to the fountain and the detention pond, and it is absolutely lovely, and I think that it's an excellent example of how Wildwood goes above and beyond to make it such a special place. I really enjoyed this bridge. But that being said, the department believes that the final product was worth the wait, and it's a little off the beaten path, so it's not something necessarily that everybody's gonna get to, and it's not a big deal like our huge parks and things like that. And so thought this would be an excellent opportunity to organize a small ribbon cutting with elected and appointed officials, residents maybe, to celebrate the foresight of the city council in supporting projects of this nature that benefit so many residents and the community as a whole. So tonight, the department is seeking direction on whether this is something that the committee supports, and if so, then the department would like to plan for this ribbon cutting, say a weekday night, probably in October. And the department will proceed with arranging the rest of the details of said event. And with that, that concludes our presentation. And if anyone has any questions, myself or Mr. Vunic are here to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Dodwell.
I'll make a motion to have a ribbon cutting ceremony. And I'd also like the address where it's at.
Oh,
Trying to figure out where this is at.
okay. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll send you.
Down to the old Seventh Fairway head across.
Yeah, I know. I'm just like, okay, I'm trying to figure.
Somebody like to second that motion? Councilmember Clark. All right, is there any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, can we amend it to include ice cream from the same place again? But
Tell them where it's at.
that was spectacular. And, but I, in all seriousness, it really is a spectacular addition. It's just above and beyond. And I think it was a great use of city funds, and I couldn't be more pleased with it. And it's nowhere near my ward because we don't do anything in Ward 6. It's really mostly the urban wards that, get all the
And
attention.
those are old stones out of the Pony Express building.
Some of them are.
That's cool.
Really?
And we salvage stone from demolitions when the owners are willing to. We store it out of Gailey's yard and we use it for
Anniversary park,
Anniversary
all
park.
of
the city park and here.
inside the cistern,
Yeah.
plus the old stone Pony Express building. Or
So
whatever.
unfortunately, we're getting down to the last of it now.
It's pretty down.
Oh, yeah, it is great. If you haven't been over there, go check it out.
Spectacular.
We should definitely, so we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion further?
Last
Let's pick a
thing,
date earlier in October rather than later in October.
Maybe one of the budget nights.
We'd have the budget meeting there.
It'll be dark there by 6:30.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add?
just if anybody were ever to say, put your money where your mouth is, that tree where the sun is kind of going through, that's the grand tree we saved.
Yeah,
That's all of the changes.
And it's,
good.
it looks good there.
It's a great picture, yeah. You should enter that in the contest.
The base of the tree.
So seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any objections and any abstentions? All right, motion passes. We look forward to seeing some options for getting that scheduled. And then next on the agenda is a presentation of Portner Park's demolition bids and environmental hygienist report on building. Director Vunic.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, the department is not seeking action on the bids that have been received. That's the first step in a two-step process. The bids that we did receive are for the demolition of Mrs. Yost's house. And as you can see, there were 3 bids that were received. Help Contracting, a local contractor, was the low bid. The next step is to obtain the bids for what we considered remediation. And what we were finding is that when we talked to remediation specialists, many of them asked questions, well, what about this? What about that? Did you think of this? And so what we ended up doing is we engaged an environmental hygienist to basically go in and do the assessment and then give us a report so that when we do get bids for remediation, everybody's bidding on the same thing and we get a standardized price and response. And so tonight you have the environmental hygienist report just to kind of give you something to look at as we move forward to the next stage. But we hope to have something back on this in October so we can calculate it into the budget as we talked previously. If there's any questions on any of the process and the information provided, Mr. Ripto and I'd be glad to try to answer. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Clark?
Just one quick question. The analysis report from the hygienist was supplied to them before they made the bid, right?
Not for the demolition. We're going to use that for the remediation. Because the demolition will follow all the standard practices and that are set forth for the demolition process, given the mold contamination. Yeah, we're basically removing the building. So the hygienist was for us to basically explore the actual remediation. And as you can see, there are some real red flags in that report.
So there's no special precautions for the ones removing the house as well with the contamination?
Well, the assumption is on the demolition, at least that's how I explained it to a couple of the bidders, is that you're the worst case scenario. So you'll have to follow all of the Department of Public Health with St. Louis County requirements relative to the authorization of the demolition permit. So we'll authorize the demolition if that's ultimately what City Council directs. They'll have to get a set of permits from St. Louis County, and St. Louis County through their Department of Public Health will ensure that all of the criteria for safe demolition and disposal is met.
Because I was just thinking that maybe the price would be higher if they had to have special PPE or something.
Again, all 3 of these are contractors that have done demolitions across the county. So we're just making the assumption that, and they all visited the site too. And against my better judgment, we're allowed access into the house.
It's probably not a bad idea.
Pardon?
I don't know that that would be a bad idea so that they can assess what they would have to demolish
Yeah.
and what kind of,
Just get the mold levels, particularly in the basement, are so high.
Like $1 million or something like that. It was quite a.
So, but they did have access to Stodwell. We didn't preclude that.
okay.
Well, thank you for that, and we'll look forward to seeing the further information that you're gathering, unless somebody else has
I
something.
just have one suggestion on the
Sure.
demolitions. It looks like it helps the guy. Maybe we should consider, rather than decommissioning the well, that can be where our restroom facility is, and we actually have we can tap into the existing septic field potentially instead of demoing the septic tank and the field and decommissioning the well, just build a structure and we've got a usable, park with real flushing toilets and et cetera.
So certainly we'll investigate that. A little bit of a story. When we were planning Glencoe City Park, we had demoed several homes down there. We had several wells that we were going to basically cap and then use for the purposes of drinking fountains and ultimately restrooms. MDNR considers that a public well, so we were going through the permitting process. MDNR then contacted Missouri American Water Company, which provides service, and it's in their service jurisdiction, and they had to grant a waiver. They wouldn't. And so to bring the potable water from Missouri American Water Company to Glencoe City Park was more than the cost of the park itself. So that's why there's no potable water to it.
But there's nothing anywhere near Pertner Park.
And that's what I'm gonna do. I'll investigate that because I think the suggestion is ideal. I hate the fact that we have no water to two of the most popular parks in the city, Foster and Glencoe. But we'll investigate that. When we bring back the other bids, I'll have an answer for you.
All right, sounds good. Everybody else good? Okay. If that's the case, then let's move on to the next item, which is the overview and discussion of the Village Green engineered plans. 90% complete in Ward 8. Is that Ms. Ripito or Director Vidic?
Gonna fight it out.
I was thinking that's Glencoe City Park. How discouraging that was when we couldn't get water. So tonight, Melanie's kind of going to go over kind of the highlights associated with phase one of Village Green. It's been a while since you've seen the plans, so there are some changes. But just to kind of give you some background, we have been working with CDI, a local engineering firm, to develop the bid specification and engineered plans. Human Nature is a sub-consultant to CDI, and Human Nature did the original master plan through that public input process that we completed during COVID. Really got a great response, much like we got from the solar energy survey. Just in terms of next steps, and then I'm going to turn it over to Melanie. We're waiting on the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District to approve the stormwater management design. And once we have that, we'll be able to make the process. We anticipate still going through this year so that we can get a solid price, hopefully, before the end of December when the budgets are finally approved. And then we also know by that time success. And the idea would be is if the budget is approved as presented with the grant component included, we do all of the construction as soon as we can in those 2020.
Okay, I think stay sitting so that I can show these while I am mentioning them. So, of course, with any plans being developed, there are always delays and adjustments. Some of them were anticipated, some of them were not. But we definitely did what we could to make the best of them. And so you see up here, we were originally going to have above ground detention, and MSC is now requiring that all levels of the stormwater protection be provided for phase one, which led to move the surface type underground, which actually turned out to be a really good thing because now all of this is going to be green space as opposed to essentially blocking off, like creating a barrier between Main Street and the park itself. And so now it will just be green space and no one will ever know it's there. And the utilities that are needed will be extended on to the site and installed underground as well. So that's also a bonus. The formal entry area will be at two locations, both pedestrian type here and here, and it will also be accessible from our future parallel parking, which is going to be along Main Street from the current set of plans we're working with. If delayed, then the park doesn't necessarily have to be accessed via Main Street. So we also have the additions over here. We also ran into complications with the trash facility being located where it currently is, which is, kind of down in this area where we were adding more parking and kind of at the entrance of the park. Thought maybe the dumpster wouldn't be a great, entry to the park. And so that needs to be relocated, which will now be relocated over closer to where the Mayor's Grove is. And this then brings the Mayor's Grove into the park, which will be located down here, which will make it more visible. And so it turned out to be a good thing as well. The overall width of the oval, the Civic Oval, was designed to be a venue for the events, and it should accommodate up to or almost 100 tents, still leaving ample space available for pedestrians and still having it an accessible route throughout the area. And it will be complemented by natural surface trails throughout the remainder of the site, as you can see over on the west side. And the very last thing that I have in the highlights is our new location of the Essen Log Cabin. So finally found a home there. And with that, I think that's all of the highlights I have for the plan. And with that, I would turn that back over to Mr. Funich.
So tonight, Melanie and I would respectfully request an endorsement of the 90% engineered plan so that when we get MSD's approval, we can begin that bidding process almost immediately.
Somebody like to make that motion?
I'll make it.
Katie? Anybody like to second?
I have some questions.
Are you seconding the motion?
Yes.
Okay, so Councilman Rambo seconds the motion and discussion, Councilman Rambo?
Yeah, so you said, Melanie, you mentioned that the utilities are underground. I think that's a great thing to bury all this stuff. I'm wondering though about the power specifically. I'm not clear on that. I don't know. I believe it's all underground here. And then it would, then the electric, currently the plan is to stay on poles for a while and then go back under, what's the plan there?
The $2 million figure I
Yeah.
mentioned is the aerial lines that go from the end of the current Main Street on the north side of Crestview up to Everton Road. There is a set of lines that go this direction, north-south, that cross
Right here.
Main Street. Those we intend to underground. There is a provision when a city project is requiring the relocation that it's a cost to Ameren, Missouri, not the city. The negotiation part is undergrounding it, and we're still working on that.
So these will potentially be underground, but the ones along Main Street, Crestview, we're not even gonna try to bury those.
Not at $2 million. So the thought is either we move them, we relocate them from an aerial perspective closer to Route 100, which is not the primary street, Main Street is, or there's a set of aerial lines that go behind the community garden and relocating there where they already exist.
Okay, and so there's no possibility of getting the developer of Crestview to pick up more of that.
We're having a meeting with McBride Homes tomorrow to talk about a range of issues relative to the cost of Main Street, and we hope to have a solution to you by October 9th.
Okay, so underground is far preferable from my perspective, but moving them along 100 is not a bad thing, but I think the best solution is behind to the south. Don't you agree?
Yes, if we have to keep them aerial, it's a wide corridor. There's already aerial lines there. Why not piggyback off of those if we can?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
not at the front, it's not in the front yard, it's in the backyard, so to speak. So the only other question was the parallel parking, are we just trying to save space there, or can we do head-in parking, or is that a safety issue, or what? Because we could get a lot more cars there for events if we had head-in parking.
Well, it originally started with head-in parking, and we can certainly return to that. But what we found is when we showed the strip map of Main Street, with the only parking being head-in at Village Green, it really looked kind of awkward. It was asymmetrical. If we do parallel parking, and we do lose a few spaces, it looked more, it was a more symmetrical design and it looked better.
And you're not that far from the parking garage.
I do want to
I think
highlight
everybody should walk extra.
where the Essen Log Cabin is, just so there's no question. You can see we have all the accessible spaces there, so the accessibility component for the use of the Village Green is at our existing, where basically the trash enclosure exists now, and we have ample spaces proposed.
So loading and unloading for tents and that kind of thing, all of that can happen here by City Hall.
Yep.
And we're just adding a few parking spaces, parallel parking spaces up there along Main Street. Okay, I'm not clear on the visual image of,
I'll send up a strip map for you, so you can see what it looks like.
okay, yeah, good job, Melanie, thank you.
Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, about the accessible parking, these would be considered, I believe, I strongly believe, the two different parking areas. And so we would have to have at least one, the street accessible, depending on how many, at least one, and then more if there's enough parking places. I don't think there's enough to have more, a need for more, but those, that would be separated by structures or building, which would make it two separate parking areas.
Certainly, CDI was given the marching orders to make this an accessible facility because of concerns that you expressed in the past. I'll have to check on Main Street with the parallel spaces. I don't like accessible spaces part of because park, we have to open the door into the drive lane, and if we have a curb or any type of drainage feature, it's not accessible from the passenger side. So I may do a little bit more. They are 90%, so I'll get that 10%, I promise.
It would also make it challenging just because there's a pretty steep incline going up this way. And there isn't any accessible way into the park other than right there. So,
People will get more engineering to do that, but it is separate parking. And the other one was, I don't see on here anywhere where it talks about signage or make it specifically stated that we'll have Braille.
We didn't do the signage plan. They'll probably engage a different company to do that. It's more my bias against engineers designing attractive signs.
What is that?
They know it on the other side of the building.
There we go.
They aren't get to where you want to go, but they wouldn't look good.
Well, we've got the motion on the floor and the second to endorse the plans, and you guys are gonna look into a couple of those items that we talked about. So with that being said, and without any,
One question, restrooms? Restrooms,
None proposed right now, no structure. That's phase two is the stage, the covered stage, the restrooms and a small,
so you do portables units around.
Or that's just like we do
Thank you.
now.
all right, well, without any further questions or comments, all in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any objections? Any abstentions?
Thank you.
All right.
I do have one quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Has Mr. Kennedy called and said thank you yet?
It's not a joke if nobody understands it. Who's Mr. Kennedy? What are we talking?
One of our residents, Joe knows who he is.
Okay, so it's an in joke.
It's an inside joke.
Okay, all
It's
right.
an inside.
All
joke.
right, moving along, guys. Old business, 2 items from the department. They're primarily informative, my understanding. Anybody has any questions related to either of these 2 items, in person and virtual recreation programs, or facility reservations, event registrations, and ongoing and long-term maintenance costs for parks and trail facilities? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I just have a
Councilman
comment.
Clark?
I'm just overwhelmed by the increase in the budget projection. And I mean, we've increased it, the full amount of the 2020 budget. Hard.
Mr. Lee has already prepared the RFQ. RFP. Basically separate lawn maintenance out from all the rest of our contracts. As what we're basically paying is almost union wage for lawn maintenance, and we're not required under state statute to do that. We think we can be more competitive and obtain the same quality. But yeah, this. And Public Works sat down with the primary contractor, explained the circumstance, and he looked, I was unapologetic about the charges. We just can't go on like this.
Anybody else have any comments?
Wouldn't hurt my feelings to slack off on the mowing, to be honest.
Right?
We told him during that droughty period from May and June, you don't need to be out there twice, once a week.
Dust, yeah.
So, yeah, so we back with that now. It's so dry out there, we're just waiting, they tell them to come back.
All right, guys, no executive session matters for consideration and then not ready for action. We've got the smaller list. So there's anybody have any questions or anything about anything on there? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Other matters, there's no other items for consideration, which brings us to the last item on the agenda, which is our next meeting on Tuesday, October 17th. So that wouldn't be a good night for the ribbon cutting ceremony at the,
Oh, excellent plan.
or maybe at 5:30.
Ice cream
And then we
social.
come straight over here. So anyway, that is the next meeting in October and budget presentations are planned for that. With that, I would like to say, unless anybody, Councilmember Clark.
I just have two things of miscellaneous.
Sure.
bring up.
Go ahead.
One is, are we still gonna look at a loop path? I think Bellevue Farms we had talked about for Braille path. We still looking at that? Could we have heard anything more about it?
You can see a discussion over during the budget presentation.
And the other was, so many things have come up this year with parks and, okay, now we've got Perkin Park and people wanted to put a park in instead of Crestview and all of these things about parks and do we have or can we develop like a master park plan for 5 years that, we've got this planning plan and a parks plan for the city with a vision of here's what we want to be in, say, 5-10 years from now. Here's what we want in the city with parks. And then when we get there, some things will come in, but it gives us a way to answer questions to residents when they're like, well, I don't have a park near my house. Or, any of the questions about parks. If we have something
We're
that
spending so much money on parks.
yeah, exactly. So if we had something that covered, was like a vision for what we want for recreation and what we want for green space and what we want for all, aesthetics wise. Have we got that? And if not, can we come up with something like that together as a group?
In 2006, we created the action plan for Parks and Recreation. In 2016, we began an update that concluded in 2018 with a group of volunteers that were selected by the individual ward representatives and confirmed by the entire council. So yeah, I'll send it out to you. It's a small document, relatively speaking, but it talks and it's got 5 basically major goals, and it talks about recreation programming, trails, parks, and a couple of others. So I'll send it on out. It was just adopted in 2018, and that's basically what we follow.
Okay, well, if I could if we can get that and then make maybe some suggestions on how to make it more detailed so that.
Well, I think you'll find it very detailed. I'd say it's only 5 goals. But there's objectives, timeframes. I think it's a very good plan. It counters what the strategic plan said, because the strategic plan went to enhance green space. This group actually wanted us to expand the trail network. So I'll send it out. Y'all can take a look at
Yeah,
it.
that'd be great.
Put it on the agenda if you'd like.
Awesome. Anybody else miscellaneous?
It occurs to me that it seems unfair to stick planning and parks budget with mowing maintenance. That just seems like a public works thing. I mean, honestly, it does. I mean, that's not our job. Has anybody talked about that? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of tension between the 2 departments who has to pay for mowing, but I don't know why all of our money has to go.
we've been mowing the trail corridors, which join the right of way. So we just kind of, Rick and I just made a decision, why don't we just put them together and then we'll shift the funds around as we get close to the end of the year. So there really wasn't much tension. We just want it to look nice and do the best we can. So.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you guys very much. I will say, we've had very good conversations tonight and some lengthy discussions, which were all very positive and good. And it's only 8:46, so I feel like we did good.
It's leadership.
Great leadership. That's
I think it's-
great leadership. So, great presentations. You guys have it all nailed.
Director Vunich for all your hard work and putting these, the agenda together and details and information you brought forward. And thank you all of you guys for your participation and the feedback and discussion. So with that being said, unless anybody has anything else, I would accept a motion for adjournment. Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Rambo. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? All right, thanks, guys. Have a good night.